Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin. We're going to be looking at what the next couple of months could hold. In order to do so, we have another special guest on the channel. He's been on before, Jordan Lindsey. He has his own YouTube channel. If you are not subscribed to Jordan, I would encourage you to go do that. We'll link his YouTube channel as well as his Twitter in the description below and in the comment. We'll pin a comment on it. Make sure you go follow Jordan if you're not already following him. One of the few analysts out there that also sticks to the data, leaves all the other stuff to the side, and I think does a great job managing emotions. Jordan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to diving back into Bitcoin with you.
Ben, thanks for having me on. I enjoy each and every time I get the chance to not only speak with you, but with all your audience. You got a highly invested audience. You've led them probably with one of the greatest situational awareness we've seen in the space. And I'm looking forward here to work together to be able to make sure that we're all prepared for what's coming.
I agree. So could you sort of give us your general outlook as we go into the next couple of months? We know October has been a pretty nice month to the upside. What do you think is coming our way for the next couple of months?
Yeah, so seasonally October wound up being generally as we were all looking forward to, and now we're all kind of in the position where, well, November also historically has been a good month, especially, as it is every 4 years. Look, this is where we're going to start from. When you first had us on the channel, we were speaking about Bitcoin was somewhere around, right, Ben? Must have been somewhere around August, the beginning of September. Bitcoin was just coming off of its what we're calling the mid-cycle low over here in July. And we were projecting what might happen the rest of the year, what our base case would be. And since then, we've completed what we call wave one, and now we're in the middle of wave two, right? Mm-hmm. And we're waiting for this area here into November, which is the last pullback before what we call liftoff, and the potential blow off top here on Bitcoin. Now, a few things to talk about is, number one, this is just a model we're using, which is taking the price action, the last 150 days of the previous two cycles, and the symmetry is getting clearer and clearer for a lot of people to see. We were waiting this whole summer, right, in order to line up the mid-cycle low when it finally came in, and we're just going to go with what works until it's showing us that it's no longer working. This has helped everyone kind of position in from a position of strength. Right now, Ben, there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to answer your question directly, and then I want to talk about the importance of what could go wrong here. Because right now, there's really, assuming that we do see a peak at the end of the year, there's no room for mistakes. Mm-hmm. So what we're looking for, Ben, is for this current wave that we're on, right, to continue up until November. And if that's happening, we're going to say, all right, it looks like we're potentially getting ready here for a blow off top. Now into November, if we're still right around here, around $60,000, if we're lower than this, at that point it's going to become very clear that most likely we're not looking at a cycle peak towards the end of the year. Now, I'm not trying to give a date for the end of the year, whether or not that's into the first couple of weeks of January, whether that winds up peaking a little bit before, we're all going to be looking at price and price alone. Similar fashion to exactly what you're doing. You're making sure that you have these ideas of what could happen, but I see you self-preparing very clearly that potentially here it looks like, well, this thing might, it might do Bitcoin things on Bitcoin time, and that's seeing these big moves we see at the end of the year, especially every 4 years on Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. The earliest we could say that we need to start looking into 2022 would be towards the middle of December over here, and that's
you mean November?
Price.
You mean November?
The middle, we're talking a couple of weeks away. Yeah, which is pretty soon, and that's the earliest. There's a lot of people, even people I work closely with, have been looking potentially what 2022 might look like. Mm-hmm. And for me myself, I can't do that right now while this template here that we're working off of continues to be. I mean, if you look where price is right now, it's actually in the sweet spot, the overlap, the darkest portion. It's right on scale. So this is, the purpose of a model is right away where it's wrong, and then you can then adapt, feel good about being able to adapt if this thing pushes further into 2022. being that we're positioned strongly here. Now, I don't think this conversation is about that. I personally think this is right on time, and that this is continues to play out. You know that I've, even
Right.
when things were difficult, held firm to that. And I think that's why we're here today, so that everyone, in case this happens, could be prepared. Right? It's not a question about, right. I mean, are we on the same page there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I know earlier this year, I was watching your stuff, and you were also talking about the mid-cycle low before it happened. But you guys were watching that really closely to say, all right, whenever it was more so, we don't know exactly when the mid-cycle low will happen, but exactly when it does happen is where we can line things up and then get some type of projection going into the end of the year, right? And now
Yeah.
we have the mid-cycle low, as you guys call it. It looks like it was what, July 20th or something, around July 20th or so. Since then, we've had a pretty nice bounce. You call it wave one, right? Wave one took us the August bounce. We had the dip going into September. We know September usually isn't a great month for Bitcoin anyway, so I think that makes a decent amount of sense. October
And
is the second wave. You're saying that October is the second wave right now?
yeah, so there's a correction that occurred. I'm gonna just make it a little bit easier and clearer for you.
Okay.
This over here is wave one, right? And then the correction started over here. And as soon as the correction started, we said that's the peak of wave one. This line up here, I know you love the trend line stuff. This trend line was then drawn in over here,
Right.
right? So the confirmation of wave two began once this broke here to the upside. But during the correction of wave one, I then drew another one of these trend lines, and this was the earliest indication that the beginning of wave two began. So like wave two, the actual bottom was over here in real time. That's where it gets really difficult, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because listen, if you're trying to catch the bottom, why wouldn't you do that over here first? And we did, right?
Right.
Actually, that took a stop loss over here. If you just like, I drew a line like this, I took my entry, that was stopped out, and once it's stopped out, then I do redraw my trend lines over to here. Here was the aggressive entry. Here's the beginning of wave two. Here's wave two being confirmed, and now we're in the middle of wave two, and you can see this little bit of a correction that we're just coming out of right now of wave two.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you about that really quick. Is it? I know. So here you mentioned that you think wave two is going to go into November, right? Like the idea is wave two peaks sometime in November. We get one more pullback, and then a rally after that. Is it possible at all? I know a lot of people have used some tools to call for like a 53K Bitcoin or a 51K Bitcoin. Do you see any reason why that needs to happen? Like, could it be that 64K could be the top or 67K could be the local top of wave two, and then we have to go back down, and then we go up parabolically, or do you still think we are in the middle of wave two?
Okay, so great question. I think we're in the middle of wave two because, again, these two yellow renditions of what the wave is or expected wave to be, they've been here before we even started these waves, and as we were just coming out.
Okay.
So it's projected wave two will end at some point towards that middle of November. There's various things that might trigger it. It could be the Fed even tapering next week or announcing a coming taper. It could be the activation of Taproot, which is a short-term sell the news. I don't really. It's very difficult, Ben. I'm going to come back to this in 1 second about doing this all in real time, and I want to talk about how difficult it was, some mistakes I made earlier in cycle, and why that's so important here. Because if you get overconfident, you're setting yourself up for failure, especially right now as potentially emotions could really come into play and strongly soon. Now, as far as where, Ben, I do look at the past cycles and their behavior, and over here, the peak of wave one, right around $53,000. In the previous cycles, price, once it broke out above it, until cycle peaked, it never came back down below it.
Right.
So the odds are for myself that 53,000, that's going to, I don't foresee price trading below that before we hit the cycle peak. And if we did, that would be my first indication that something is not right and something is off. And that would be the first indication that we're not going to be peaking in 2021. So, I mean, that's not that far away from market. Obviously, there's a little bit more room than there was just even a couple of days ago. But, we have the structures here. Technically, you're able to get a heads up very quickly where something is different. And then if we did break below that peak of wave one, then we do have this line over here, which was the confirmation of wave two beginning. And that could hold that support. If that broke, then structurally something is very different.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't know what it was right away, but I would know that everyone or myself or anyone would need to take a different posture. And if that need protecting themselves, taking some profits as we were able coming out of wave one to position in nicely, go ahead and do that, because it's always better to get at that point a little defensive and a little more neutral as soon as something different is happening.
Right.
But that's not happening right now. Right now, everything does seem to be playing out, quote unquote, on time. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I think so. Is there any so it makes sense that I think that we're sort of in the middle of wave two. Do you have any idea, could wave two take us to 100K, probably below 100K? Do you have any guess on that? I mean, obviously no one really knows, right? We're just sort of throwing out numbers based on prior predictions or prior moves and stuff. But do you have any type of thinking on where that could take us?
I mean, yeah. So that's really, so when I put something out there in the public, I try to do it pretty general.
Okay.
I want to get it right.
The qualitative part is more important specifically than exactly what value it goes to.
Yeah, so what I did over here, I have this this is price between 68,000 or 69,000 and 70, 78, 79,000. And also by time, somewhere between the 7th and the 14th over here. And that's, when I put that up there, Ben, price was still in the correction of wave one. So that's pretty,
No, it's worked out pretty well.
That's awesome, right? But
yeah, it's worked out really well.
A few weeks ago, that's wait, that seems very steep, right? In a short amount of time. And perhaps so, you never know what's going to happen. But all I did was go back and look at the first two cycles. And from the peak of wave one to where the peak of wave two, it was roughly 50%. It was a little greater, but I just went with 50%. I want to be right? And then I looked at the distance of wave one, and there was some symmetry. So that's why I have the lower end of that. So I just wanted a general area. It's very difficult to predict price and time like that with that type of accuracy. So we could go higher than that. Whether or not we went higher than, some of the people I work more closely with, they try to get very accurate, and they've done very good jobs. And, they're looking more around 84,000,
Right.
I just want to get towards this area, and if we get there, have that as another check mark that we continue to be on time. If we went towards, something like above 90,000 on the peak of wave one, for me, that would be very aggressive. I would be thinking that we went pretty far, pretty quickly, and why that might potentially mean that the upside here, if we do enter that blow up top phase, might be a little bit higher. I personally, and I generally have a long-term time preference. I would be taking a little profits.
Right.
I generally don't like to take profits in the bull market. What I like to do is to add to the corrections. Here's a correction. I like to add to my position out of the corrections, but price would have come too far too quick if we see something like, let's call it above $85,000, $90,000.
Right. Well, I mean, imagine too, if you go back and look at, I know you're fully aware of this because you've spoken about it on your channel before. If you go to, November of 2013, Bitcoin went absolutely parabolic. Is there any, at what point, if Bitcoin were to just start moving and let's say it went 70K, 80K, 90K, 100K, 120,
right.
and if we don't have that pullback, is there a certain point where you think we could just be headed straight into that final blow off top and we skip the second, that next pullback? Do you think there's any possibility that the market just sort of front runs it and they're like, all right, we're not going to wait for the pullback anymore, and we're just going to go straight up to whatever the market cycle peak is going to be by the end of next month, even?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay.
Now it's a great question and the reason it's a great question because this is the risk that people take who try to trade these things. It's extraordinarily difficult to time the market on a short-term time basis. Generally, people who try to do that, they might like you're saying, they might maybe someone takes profit around like $90,000 and then price goes towards 95 or 100. Those people generally then have this like fear that they're missing out, and they wind up like buying back in higher right before price goes against them. Let's start like this. If price does wind up shooting like the moon and getting away from us without looking back, which I do not think is going to happen at all, because that's not healthy.
Right.
Usually markets don't behave like that. But if it did, then everyone should first of all already be positioned, and that's why you don't want to sell, but only look to add more on the correction, right? Because you want to stay fully positioned until either using like things like your risk metric, you discern that,
Right.
hey, now Bitcoin is no longer fairly valued, it's no longer undervalued, it's overvalued, and I'm comfortable and I want to take profits. And Ben, we need to talk a lot about once people do take profits on Bitcoin, because then the risk becomes truly not owning Bitcoin. But before we move on to that portion, let's make sure that people understand that most likely there's no, like, first of all, following all the work that you put out on Into the Cryptoverse, everyone should already be positioned well in, because I saw that obviously you took profits mid-cycle over here, and then you positioned back in, right? So people here at this time of the year are not generally looking to take new positions. If you are, make sure that you are preemptive of price and not chasing price. And what I mean by preemptive, it's during these corrections that you look to enter. So potentially, or most likely, we're going to have another correction, and that's going to be at the peak of wave 2, right? And that might be the last potential place for people to look to take a position. At that point, though, we're getting towards where Bitcoin is no longer fairly valued and starting to become overvalued.
Right, which is certainly not you don't get a lot of fans on YouTube when you say a kind of stuff like that. But right, that's the stuff you have to say, right? You got to tell people what they don't want to hear, and the time will come, right, when it'll be significantly overvalued, I think. And
Ben, you've spent so much time preparing people that at this point, I'll be the one to say it along with you. Yeah, people need to now look at protecting themselves.
Right.
You were sounding the alarm when Bitcoin was undervalued. Now is the time to be taking positions, and generally that's how the market works. As Bitcoin goes to new all-time highs, as Bitcoin eventually crosses 100,000, that's when the real FOMO is going to. But we're always looking ahead, right? So our objective here is going to be, as Bitcoin becomes overvalued, then be looking to take profits. And you have to understand, well, there's a time in between where it just doesn't make, from a risk standpoint, sense to be taking new positions. And then we could go back to like beginner fundamentals. If your dollar cost average into Bitcoin with a long-term time horizon, yes, of course, that's a fundamental plan you should have in place and stick to.
Right. What do you think, like, let's suppose we have a wave 2 that ends up, we're already in the middle of wave 2, so we can say we're already in it, we're already having a wave 2, but let's suppose that, it goes up another 20 grand or something like that. And then let's say we pull back and we do have a blow off top. Let's suppose we have a blow off top. I'd like to get your input on a couple questions there. Do you have any idea where? I mean, I don't want to specifically ask you for like a number, but maybe like could you give a range as to where you think, like, if it hit this value or a certain range, you think it's probably getting pretty close to the cycle top? Like, for instance, like what if we go to 100K by mid-December, let's say we're at 100K by mid-December, is it a timing thing? Like, do you think that could be the market cycle peak, or do you think we need to go to 200K before it could be the market cycle peak, even if we're not there by mid-December? And then the second question to follow up that would be, after sort of we have the blow off top, whatever price it's at, what is your outlook for, say, the next 12 months following that market cycle peak?
Yeah, perfect. So, look, we're right here right now. We're in the middle of wave 2. We could all say, okay, for sure, it looks that and it appears that we're in the middle of wave 2. this wave before while we were in the correction, it was like, well, okay, this particular model here at this time is completely dependent on what happens next. And it's always that way, right? Because as we finish wave two, and assuming that we do, it then becomes the price action out of this area over here that we call liftoff, right? And you
Right.
can see in the past that, well, there's some similar characteristics. It's almost like a V that you see in both prior cycles. So if during the correction of wave two we see something similar to that, that's going to be like, well, okay, that's happening again, kind of, similar. Let's watch what happens next, because you don't miss what happens next as price starts rising and rising quickly, right? So if those things are two happening in the very beginning, we're going to say, all right, well, it looks like game is on.
Right.
And then as price begins rising, this is where it gets extraordinarily difficult. And
Yeah.
anyone who thinks that first of all that it's easy, that they're going to get it right, and that you're kidding yourself, and you need to, like, really right now, it's getting late in the game, to start preparing yourself mentally, emotionally, psychologically. And that comes from absolutely a position of humility. Understand how incredibly difficult this is going to be. And if you're starting from that foundation, well, then at least you're giving yourself a chance. As price starts rising above $100,000, there's no particular price that would say, well, well, that's the top. It's completely dependent on what price is doing. Now, the things like your risk model is an enormous edge for a lot of market participants, because then, according to that risk metric, you're taking off different positions at different times. Like,
Right. Yeah.
literally, you can't go wrong, right? And
Right.
people have to understand, look, when different options are laid out, you don't want to go with the most difficult always, right? Like, what you want to do here is get it right and continue getting it right over these next 10 years, so that you could go ahead and do, truly life-changing things. And
Right.
if you make a mistake now during this portion, you could be setting yourself back for years. Now, there are, so Ben, we generally need to go off of price action, and assuming we get into this area over here within the next, few weeks, we could talk again and prepare everyone else for what exactly that's going to look like, together. And that's going to be something that there's no black and white formula. If 1, 2, 3 happens, then X. I mean, unless we got
Sure.
like this area over here, we call this like the big stupid candle. And this is like a 50% move that happens, let's call it within 36 hours. Now, it happened in those past two cycles. That doesn't mean it's going to happen again. If it does, that will make our life easier. But could you imagine most people seeing price come up that much and then shooting back, Bitcoin going from like, 160,000 to 120,000 in one day? I think
Right.
people are underestimating what they're going to be going through and or experiencing with that type of volatility in the market. But if we're seeing things like that set up, and then it sets up this, again, it happened this 1, 2, 3, 4 step in the previous four cycles, then that would be an exit, and it would be an exit, Ben. I'll line it up for you later. It's going to be off a trend line break, a sell impulse, and you know, it even though talking about it, it may seem, oh well, that's clear and easy. There's nothing easy about it. It's going
Yeah.
to take a lot of work, a lot of focus, a lot of balance, a lot of calmness, and Anyway, I've emphasized enough. There's simply nothing easy about it, and I don't want anyone to have any other impression than that. And that leads up to the next question about what I believe happens afterwards,
Right.
right? And I think that just as right now and always in Bitcoin at a pretty important juncture, because I could know where, well, things are different in the next couple of weeks, next few weeks, and maybe that we're peaking out into some point later, and then we could figure out what that's going to look like. And as long as price doesn't come back down below what I talked about, like the peak of wave one, we're all sitting in a great position, and time is on our side, really, at that point. But what happens if this does play out and we peak some point towards the end of the year? Let's say people wound up taking profits as Bitcoin becomes overvalued. What happens next is really dangerous. It's really dangerous because your risk becomes not owning Bitcoin. What do I mean by that? Well, right now, the macro environment of the financial system, which is really central bank centric. I mean, but that's what it is. And right now, there's a lot going on in the markets that's a little surprising. We were talking about yesterday. Anyone who thinks that they have an understanding of what's going on, as we're seeing shocks in the bond market throughout the world, they're really deluding themselves also. This time is different in that it could, if for any reason the Federal Reserve loses control, these things could unravel very quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
It looks like the Fed at this point in time, it looks like on November 3rd, this coming Wednesday, that they are getting either ready to taper and or set up a taper into December. People are wondering, how is it possible that the Fed could start lessening a tapering of their bond purchases, their quantitative easing, when the economy right now is kind of slipping away and falling apart. You don't tighten into a weak economy. On the other hand, we have these inflationary pressures, which are not transitory, and they are forcing the central bank to have to take actions that they don't necessarily want to take, because if the inflation does continue to get away, that's the quickest way that people could lose faith in the system. So all I'm getting at is that this is entirely complex. It's all taking place right now. It could cause something of a black swan where Bitcoin wound up peaking even earlier at a much less price. If Bitcoin peaked under $100,000, I think all of us would be extremely surprised. Now, I don't think
Right.
that's happening or anything like that, but we have to watch what is happening and not like have this preconceived idea of what we think is going to happen and then stick to that. We have to
Mm-hmm.
have very clear ideas of what we think is going to happen, play out all different possibilities and options, and then watch as things are introduced to the market, how the markets react. Most likely, on any type of Fed taper, there'll be a slight market reaction and everything will continue. I'm aware of it being a threat to Bitcoin in its current bull market phase. I don't think right now that it is a high threat. However, if we start seeing a peak over here, right, and then in 2022, you see this move that occurs after so far. I wish I had these charts pulled up for you, Ben, and we were talking about the bear market, but the bear market in all three cycles has a very similar structure. You see a 50% plus pullback first,
Right.
40 to 50% pullback first, and then a bounce, right? On that bounce this time, by the way, it's then generally been followed by a 70% drawdown and then a prolonged movement before the capitulation. On this 50% bounce, you're going to see a lot of different market participants having a different view of what is happening. There are a lot of people, and they very well might be correct, that this time is different. That at this time that we do run out into 2022 and potentially much higher than this first peak in December. That could be even if Bitcoin peaked out between 150 and $200,000. Then we see a pullback, and a lot of participants are looking for Bitcoin to run up much higher than that, with numbers at like $400,000, something
Right.
like that, right? So on this, if you do see Bitcoin pull back over here on this bounce, well, anyone who is holding that view at that point is going to feel very comfortable, right? Even though like this should be a warning sign internally. If
Mm-hmm.
within a matter of, let's call it a week or two, you see Bitcoin come up 40, 50%, like inside you're going to be like, well, something's not right. That doesn't feel right. And then Bitcoin bouncing back, and you're going to be like, okay, it's coming back.
The
It's going
return
to
to
be
normal.
fine. The return to normal, and it's very real, especially if you are looking for Bitcoin to peak out later into 2022. And the
Right.
whole thing is, they very well might be right, right? Nobody knows ahead of time. So if you do exit over here, you have to have a game plan of when you would say, well, this is not right, this is wrong, and I am positioning back in. And at the same time, Ben, anyone who held through that bounce of hope, right? It's very clear when the next sell impulse starts. And again, it just comes from drawing a trend line like that. And if you see it break like this way, at that point, regardless of what you believed was going to happen, it is best to protect yourself because it looks
Right.
like that we are seeing once again, a lot of repeated patterns happening out in similarity.
Right, and at that point, we'd probably be looking at a year bear market probably with an 80% drop in the price of Bitcoin. I'm assuming.
That's what I think, and it could get complicated. Just really, if we start seeing the Fed tighten during this period, continue tapering, that could put a lot of pressure on Bitcoin in the bear market. Now, one thing that might happen is the bear market might end up being shorter than that 12-month period. If, for example, things unwound, and if things unwind, that would be very bad for Bitcoin. Then it's probably very clear we see an 80-85% drawdown. But like, remember back in March 2020, before the Fed came in and expanded the balance sheet, Bitcoin came off 63% and quickly. And if that's happening during a bear market, do expect Bitcoin to be under more pressure, except if the Fed does come in and has to reignite and restart the QE program, that could actually end the bear market sooner than would be anticipated. So that's also something we need to be watching out for and aware of.
Right. Well, I'm sure we'll definitely circle back to that in the future. After all this is played out and whatnot, whatever ends up does, whatever plays out. At some point,
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll have a bear market, right? Whether it happens in a month, 2 months, 5 months, whatever, we'll have a bear market at some point. And yeah, I'm sure people are going to be interested because that'll actually be, and that's where all the real money is made, right? Buying in the bear market or buying at the bottom so that you can then ride whatever comes up later. That's what puts you in
well,
such.
that's interesting you say that because right now, as people who might not be as positioned as much as they like, and they might be trying to take some risks that they shouldn't take because you never know they should actually be looking forward to the bear market, man. They
Yeah,
should be, yeah.
I love bear markets because I mean it also has a way of like flushing out all the garbage in the space too, which is kind of nice. Unfortunately, more garbage just comes the next cycle, um, but it does have a way of kind of cleansing the space for a while of a lot of different things, and yeah, it's pretty nice. And also, the more serious investors, I think, kind of stick around for the bear market. They're still kind of following things. They're not just completely checked out to only tune back in at the next market cycle peak, right? That's when they accumulate.
A lot's being built. A lot's being. Ben, I want to make sure that it wasn't too general about anything because I'm trying to make
No,
sure
I mean,
that
I
we're
think
safe.
it's pretty clear. I mean, like it seems like we had wave one and we had a correction, we had a pullback. We're in the middle of wave two. The idea is that wave two is probably going to have a local or a top sometime in November. We should have one more pullback. According to this model, we should have one more pullback
Right.
after the top of wave two. That would sort of be kind of like the last chance to buy the dip, so to speak. And
That's
after
right.
that, and after that, assuming that the model continues to play out, we would have a parabolic rally going into the final month of the year. And I'll say this right now. If that plays out, I would agree with you in December that it would probably be the market cycle peak. Like if we're sitting here in
Right.
December and Bitcoin is trading for 200K or higher, right? If we're hanging out at these really high prices in a month and a half from now, then I would say it's highly likely that that is the market cycle peak because that's just going up too quickly, and the market probably won't be able to sustain that for very long. But it'll be interesting to
Yeah.
see
So
how it
we
plays
want to
out,
be.
and we want to be prepared
That's
for it.
exactly what we want to be prepared for. Exactly what you're talking about. If that happens, and then obviously after that happens, again, we need to make sure that you're always looking to protect yourself. A lot of people are always looking at what their potential profit could be, and they would do much better off understanding what their risks are at all points, right?
Right.
So exiting, what the risk becomes, well, what happens if we do continue out onto a new dynamic in 2022. Just one other thing I need to share with you at this moment is it looks like right now on this last little bit of a pullback we had, that what happened was the all-time high was actually retested. And I know that sounds a little bit off because the all-time high was, right around here, around 64,000 and change. And then price is coming lower than that. Let's go to a daily time frame. And you can see that in this area, price has 1, 2, 3 points of resistance. And just going ahead and drawing a line in that area, you can see that that's kind of where price just found its support. And if it does resume off, like taking out that last high would be the confirmation, then it looks like the market was trying to go ahead after making new all-time high, test out where exactly that was, find and confirm that support. This would be a very extremely bullish signal. And I think you're looking at that as well. I saw the video. I bookmarked it to watch later today, and you were showing that retest of that wave that we're coming into.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times, especially when you have these, we had like a distribution phase to some degree, right, back in April and May, where people took profits and whatnot. We ended up going down 50%. I think it makes sense to spend a little bit of time retesting some of those levels just to see if we can turn that prior. I mean, we held 60K as resistance for what, like 3 months, or around 60K as resistance for 3 months.
That's right.
I think it makes a little bit of sense to say, all right, now we're going to hold it as support, and continue higher. I mean, I think this analysis is really interesting, and I mean, I think you've been pretty spot on since we had you last on the channel. Since the mid-cycle low, we had that first wave that took us up to 53K, pullback to 39, 40K. We're in the middle of wave 2. It seems like, I mean, the wave 2 started at 40K. We're currently at 63K. I think we're around 63K now. If it continues up another 20 grand and we get one more pullback, I mean, I think everyone's going to want to be paying attention at that point, because then, or they should already be paying attention, but if they're not at that point, because then if that plays out and we end up going absolutely manic mode by the end of the year, then things can get away from people really quickly if they don't have a plan.
Well summarized. And I just want to explain what I'm talking about, how hard it is doing it in real time, because even if that's all happening, don't get comfortable and take for granted that you got it and you know what's going to happen, because it's just not like that. Over here, Ben, I was originally looking for a peak in September of the market, and the reason I did that is I was looking for the length of the bear market in days, right? And then generally in past cycles, it was less 2%. It gave the duration of the bull market.
Right.
So from the halving on, that was the guidepost that I was going off of. And then over here, I was looking for a mid-cycle shakeout, and price came off 30% over in this area. And I thought that was it, because it seems like, well, everything is lining up on time. And then I called this as actually being the bottom, and I thought this was the bottom of wave 1, right? And then as price came up, it certainly looked like that until price came back down, and that was no longer a V. And that's the advantage of a model, because you know where you're wrong and how to readapt. And even though right now everything looks like, well, seems to be playing out, and I'm gonna, make sure that I'm paying attention to it, don't get comfortable. It's the markets. You have to be flexible. Anything can happen at any time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I certainly had no idea that Bitcoin was going to go to 64K earlier this year. That definitely took me by surprise for sure. So I would say everyone has to always be ready for everything, be willing to adapt. But I think the models are great because they can help you formulate a plan if it plays out in a certain way, right? It's just a lot of if-then statements, right? If X, then Y.
That's exactly it right there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, hey, Jordan, it's been a pleasure having you on again. I mean, I'm sure we'll have you on at least one more time before the end of the year, especially as we kind of see how the rest of the year wraps up. I want to remind everyone, if you're not subscribed to Jordan, I would encourage you to do so. We'll again leave a link to his YouTube channel down in the description below. We'll also link his Twitter. I think he's fairly active on Twitter as well. They have a whole community out there they're always posting charts and whatnot, and I'm following those charts and seeing what they're posting. I think it's a great community, so go check it out if you're not already. Subscribe to Jordan or following him on Twitter, and I think you'll find he's one of the more sensible people in the space. Jordan, it was a pleasure having you on. I'm sure we'll have you on again in a few weeks, and until then, I will see you next time.
Thanks, Ben. Totally enjoyed it.
All right, bye.